Gold trades at approximately $80,000 per kilogram, the universal reference for material value per weight. Most materials in the world are nowhere near it. These 15 woods are the exceptions. The entries at the lower end command values that no biological material has any business reaching. The entries at the top exceed gold, in some cases by a factor of 5 or more, for reasons that have nothing to do with rarity alone, and everything to do with what these materials do, what they represent, and what cannot be synthesized to replace them. This is 15 woods ranked by documented price, ascending toward the one material that trades at a multiple of gold, with authenticated specimens in major auction houses. Number 15. Lignum vitae, Guaiacum officinale and Guaiacum sanctum, Caribbean and Central America. At approximately $1,000 per kilogram for quality material, Lignum vitae sits far below gold's price. It belongs on this list for a different reason. It is the only wood that lubricates itself. The heartwood contains between 25 and 30% guaiac resin by weight, causing the wood to exude its own lubricant under friction. The interlocked grain, in which fibers spiral in alternating directions across the growth rings, gives it a hardness and compression resistance that no other timber approaches. The Royal Navy used lignum vitae for the sheaves of block and tackle systems throughout the age of sail. The United States Navy used it for propeller shaft bearings in nuclear submarines of the Los Angeles and Seawolf classes into the late 20th century, choosing it over engineered polymers because it required no active lubrication system and generated no detectable acoustic signature. The bearing material in a nuclear submarine that is actively tracking and being tracked cannot afford a pump. There are limits, though. Both Guaiacum species are listed on CITES Appendix 2 and classified as endangered by the IUCN. Plantation cultivation has not succeeded at commercial scale, and lignum vitae bearings are now used only where no synthetic substitute performs comparably. The wood that lubricated the Royal Navy and hushed the submarines. At $1,000 a kilogram, it is the most underpriced material on this list relative to what it does. Number 14. Pink ivory, Berkemia zaheri, Southern Africa. Pink ivory commands approximately $3,000 to $7,000 per kilogram for figured heartwood. The price reflects two things: a geographic range so narrow it constitutes a single ecological corridor, and a historical use restriction that embedded the wood in regional cultural significance before European contact. The tree is found in a limited area of Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and the northeastern corner of South Africa. The heartwood color, ranging from pale pink through salmon to deep rose red, varies with age, position in the tree, and growing conditions. Zulu tradition restricted pink ivory to royalty, a cultural designation that parallels restrictions on imperial purple fabric in Rome or yellow silk in Qing China. The association with royal use is documented in 19th century accounts by European observers, including James Stewart, whose collected testimonies are held at the Killie Campbell Collections in Durban. There are limits to the supply picture. South African forestry regulations restrict its felling. Documented commercial harvest is minimal, and most material in trade derives from old stock or incidental removal. A royal timber from a single corridor of African savanna. The color alone would justify its price. The history makes it something else. Number 13. Indian sandalwood, Santalum album, Karnataka, India. Indian sandalwood heartwood trades at approximately $5,000 to $12,000 per kilogram for oil-rich material, not primarily for the wood as a structural material, but for the oil the wood contains. Santalum album produces sandalwood oil at approximately 3 to 6% of heartwood weight by steam distillation. The oil, rich in alpha-santalol and beta-santalol, is the most prized aromatic compound in perfumery and has been in continuous documented use for at least 4,000 years, appearing in Vedic texts and in Egyptian records as a component of embalming preparations. The government of Karnataka holds a state monopoly on sandalwood felling and sale. All legally harvested trees must be processed through state channels, a monopoly that has existed since the 19th century, initially under British colonial administration. Private trees on private land remain state property when felled. The oil from Karnataka heartwood is chemically distinct from Australian or Pacific sandalwood oil, and the distinction is measurable by gas chromatography and detectable by trained perfumers. There are limits to the origin premium. Cultivated Indian sandalwood now supplies an increasing fraction of the market, and the authentication chain for wild Karnataka material is unreliable below the level of certified government auction stock. 4,000 years of documented use, a state monopoly that predates independence, an oil that perfumers can identify by origin in a blind test. The wood is priced for what it contains. Number 12. Red sandalwood, Pterocarpus santalinus, Andhra Pradesh, India. Red sandalwood, unrelated to Indian sandalwood despite the name, trades at approximately $3,000 to $8,000 per kilogram, with seizure valuations in Indian law enforcement records providing some of the most reliable documented price data. The wood is endemic to a defined zone of the Eastern Ghats in Andhra Pradesh, and commercial-grade trees in that zone are now rare enough that the primary documented supply entering trade is illegal. Pterocarpus santalinus produces no aromatic oils. Its value derives from three separate properties: an intense red heartwood used historically as a natural dye, extreme density and hardness for fine furniture and musical instruments, and documented use in Ayurvedic medicine under the Sanskrit name Rakta Chandana, as well as in Chinese traditional medicine under the name Zitan. CITES Appendix 2 listing since 2004 has not resolved enforcement. India reported seizures totaling several hundred tons over the following decade. The Wildlife Crime Control Bureau of India has published case records identifying specific networks and routes. There are limits to market authentication. Red sandalwood from Andhra Pradesh and timber from lesser restricted sources can be difficult to differentiate without isotope analysis. A wood worth smuggling by the ton. The price per kilogram in seizure records is more reliable documentation of value than any auction catalog. Number 11. Cocobolo, Dalbergia retusa, Central America. Cocobolo trades at approximately $4,000 to $8,000 per kilogram for top-grade material and is one of the few timbers that presents a physical hazard to the craftsmen who work it. The wood contains dalbergiones, quinone compounds that act as sensitizers in the human immune system. Subsequent exposures after initial sensitization can produce dermatitis, respiratory irritation, or anaphylactic response. Documented cases appear in occupational medicine literature, and professional woodworkers who develop cocobolo sensitivity typically cannot return to working the material. The wood itself is extraordinary. Density of approximately 1.1 grams per cubic centimeter means it sinks in water. Oil content high enough to resist glue and finish adhesion requires extended surface preparation before bonding. The color range, orange and red through deep brown and black, with irregular figuring, cannot be predicted from the log exterior. Turned or planed smooth, cocobolo takes a natural polish requiring no finishing compound. CITES Appendix 2, listing in 2017, brought all Dalbergia species under international trade regulation, complicating but not eliminating legitimate trade. There are limits to the finishing applications. The same oil content that gives Cocobolo its self-polishing property makes bonding to other materials unreliable without extensive preparation. It is a wood that resists being incorporated into anything except itself. Beautiful, toxic to those who work it, impossible to glue without preparation, and worth $8,000 a kilogram. Cocobolo does not make concessions to the craftsman. Number 10. Brazilian rosewood. Dalbergia nigra, Atlantic Forest, Brazil. Brazilian rosewood has not been legally traded internationally since 1992, when CITES Appendix 1 listing placed it in the category of species for which commercial trade is prohibited between signatory nations. The price of pre-listing certified stock is approximately $15,000 to $40,000 per kilogram for instrument-grade material. The documentation requirement is what drives the premium. Authenticated provenance is the product as much as the wood itself. Before the listing, Dalbergia nigra was the standard wood for classical guitar backs and sides in the tradition established by Spanish luthiers in the 19th century and dominant through most of the 20th. The acoustic properties, high stiffness, moderate density, low internal damping, produce a resonance characteristic that players and luthiers have described consistently across generations of instruments. Guitars built from pre-ban material command premiums at auction beyond the instrument's intrinsic value. The wood's provenance is recorded in the sale description and affects the hammer price. There are limits to the authentication infrastructure. Pre-ban certification requires documentation chains that become harder to verify as decades pass. The market operates on a trust basis that has been abused in documented fraud cases. Banned from trade for more than 30 years. Still available at a price with the right documentation. The certification is worth as much as the wood. Number 9. African blackwood. Dalbergia melanoxylon, Tanzania and Mozambique. African blackwood is the densest commercially harvested wood in the world, at approximately 1.3 grams per cubic centimeter, and the only timber used without exception for professional orchestral woodwind instruments. Instrument-grade material trades at approximately $15,000 to $30,000 per kilogram, approaching gold's price at the upper end. The price reflects physical properties that have no viable substitute against a supply situation that is deteriorating against fixed, inelastic demand. The wood's density, hardness, and dimensional stability allow clarinet and oboe bodies to be bored to precise tolerances and hold those tolerances across the temperature and humidity changes of performance conditions. The tone quality is distinguishable from alternatives by professional players and documented in listening tests. No synthetic material reproduces the acoustic signature. The Bagamoyo Blackwood Conservation Project, established in Tanzania in the 1990s, documented the decline of mature diameter trees in accessible Miombo woodland and initiated plantation programs requiring between 60 and 100 years to produce usable instrument-grade timber. There are limits to plantation solutions. The maturation time means conservation planting initiated in the 1990s will not produce usable timber within the working careers of the luthiers currently active. The wood inside every professional clarinet and oboe. Trading near gold's price per kilogram, with a supply chain that takes a century to replenish. Number 8. Swamp Kauri, Agathis australis, New Zealand. 30,000 to 50,000 years old. Swamp Kauri is the only commercially significant timber sold not for what it currently is, but for what it used to be. The wood is radiocarbon dated to between 30,000 and 50,000 years before present. Trees that grew during the last glacial maximum fell into swampy ground, and were preserved by the anaerobic, acidic conditions of New Zealand peat bogs. Excavated specimens are structurally intact, workable timber, holding tool marks, despite being older than the earliest confirmed cave art in Europe. Premium figured specimens trade at approximately $10,000 to $30,000 per kilogram. The preservation mechanism is documented in New Zealand geological literature. The combination of low pH, low temperature, and absence of oxygen prevented aerobic decay. Radiocarbon dating of individual specimens has been conducted by multiple institutions and is cited in export documentation required under New Zealand's Resource Consent Framework. Guitar top wood from subfossil kauri has been used by luthiers who report dimensional stability and resonance characteristics comparable to old-growth Sitka spruce. There are limits to the supply, which is finite and non-renewable by definition. Excavation consents are issued under New Zealand resource management law, and new site identification is becoming increasingly difficult as accessible deposits are worked out. Timber from trees that were alive when humans first entered Europe. The price includes the age. Number 7. Pernambuco. Pau-Brasilia echinata. Atlantic Forest, Brazil. A single orchestral bow blank of top-grade Pernambuco, a billet approximately 60 centimeters long, of straight grain, free of figure, with the correct density and flexibility profile, can sell for between $2,000 and $8,000. At those dimensions and the wood's density, the per-kilogram equivalent for premium bow-grade material reaches approximately $20,000 to $50,000, approaching gold's price range. No other wood has been used for professional orchestral bows for 3 centuries. Pernambuco is the wood that named Brazil. When Portuguese explorers reached the South American coast in 1500 CE, the wood they found producing a vivid red dye from its heartwood was called pau-brasil, and the land became Brazil. French bowmaker François-Xavier Tourte, working in Paris in the late 18th century, standardized the modern orchestral bow design using Pernambuco, selecting it for its specific combination of stiffness, weight, and elasticity. Every subsequent standard in orchestral bow design has been measured against the Tourte model. CITES Appendix 2 listing in 2007 formally recognized the supply crisis. The International Pernambuco Conservation Initiative has established plantation programs while acknowledging that no identified alternative produces the acoustic result that Pernambuco delivers. There are limits to plantation solutions. The physical properties that qualify a blank for bow making are not reliably produced by plantation-grown trees, which grow faster and develop different wood structure than old-growth material. The wood that named a country. Now worth $50,000 a kilogram at top grade, because 3 centuries of orchestral tradition cannot be re-engineered around a different material. Number 6. Mun ebony. Diospyros mun, Central Vietnam. Mun ebony is classified as critically endangered by the IUCN and exists in no known commercial quantity that can be legally sourced through standard trade channels. Price data comes primarily from documented seizures by Vietnamese authorities and from black market intelligence compiled by Traffic, the Wildlife Trade Monitoring Organization. The per-kilogram figure implied by seized consignment values is approximately $20,000 to $60,000, at or above gold's price range for the best documented transactions. Diospyros mun has a range confined to a narrow zone of central Vietnam's coastal forests. The heartwood is jet black, extremely dense, and produces a surface polish equivalent to African blackwood. Vietnamese records and colonial-era French forestry surveys both document it as rare throughout the recorded period. There are no plantation programs and no documented successful cultivation outside its native habitat. Vietnam's domestic forestry law prohibits felling. International trade requires CITES documentation that cannot be legitimately obtained for material that cannot be legally harvested. Traffic's published reports document the cross-border routes through Laos and China through which the material nonetheless moves. There are limits to what the price data can establish. Seizure valuations reflect enforcement assessments, not transaction prices. Auction data for authenticated Mun ebony in legal trade is essentially non-existent. A wood that exists in records, in enforcement reports, and in the collections of those who acquired it before it became inaccessible. The market price is documented in confiscation records rather than receipts. Number 5. Agar wood oil. Oud. Extracted from Aquilaria species, Southeast Asia and South Asia. Agar wood oil, oud, is not timber. It is the distilled essential oil extracted from resin-saturated agar wood heartwood, included here because the price relationship between raw wood and extracted oil illustrates value concentration more clearly than any other entry. Steam distillation of high-grade agar wood yields approximately 1 to 2% oil by weight. The oil trades at between $30,000 and $120,000 per kilogram for fine-grade material, firmly above gold's price at the upper range. Gas chromatography profiles of OUD oil from different source species and producing countries, Bangladesh, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Vietnam, are measurably distinct, and trained specialists can identify regional origin by fragrance profile. The luxury perfumery industry has incorporated OUD oil across high-end formulations over the past 4 decades, with LVMH, Chanel, and specialist Middle Eastern perfumers using it in products where a single application may contain less than 1 milligram. Wild harvested oil commands a significant premium over plantation-derived material, with origin documented by independent laboratories, including the International Agar Wood Association's verification services. There are limits to the authentication infrastructure. The premium for wild origin oil has driven adulteration and mislabeling that laboratory analysis can detect, but that retail buyers typically cannot verify independently. 1 to 2% yield from wood that is already the most expensive timber on Earth. The oil is worth more per kilogram than the wood that produced it, because concentration is its own form of scarcity. Number 4. Wild sinking-grade agar wood. Aquilaria, malacensis, and related species. Southeast Asia. Wild agar wood of sinking grade, wood so saturated with oleoresin that it exceeds the density of water, trades at approximately $30,000 to $120,000 per kilogram for authenticated wild material from historically premium-producing regions. At the midpoint of that range, it exceeds gold's price per kilogram. The designation sinking grade is the trade's recognition that resin saturation, not mere presence of resin, is the measure of value. All Aquilaria species produce agar wood only in response to wounding or infection, typically from the fungal pathogen Phyalophora parasitica or related species. A healthy, unwounded tree produces nothing. Only those responding to injury or infection over decades or centuries develop the dense resin deposits that constitute the valuable material. The Aquilaria malacensis populations of the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra, historically among the most productive, are now listed as vulnerable by the IUCN, CITES Appendix. 2 listing covers all Aquilaria and Gyronops species. Plantation-derived agar wood, in which infection is artificially induced, now supplies a significant fraction of the market, but commands substantially lower prices than authenticated wild material, with the chemical difference detectable by gas chromatography. There are limits to what plantation agar wood represents as a substitute. The fragrance profile that the market distinguishes and prices is not reproduced by induced infection in cultivated trees. Wood that sinks. Wood so full of accumulated response to damage and time that it exceeds the density of water. Wild trees old enough to have reached this state are now rarer than the material they produce. Number 3. Vietnamese Khai Nam. Khai Nam. Aquilaria crasna. Central Vietnam. Khai Nam is a grade designation for the rarest agarwood produced by Aquilaria crasna in central Vietnam, distinct from ordinary sinking-grade agarwood in fragrance chemistry, physical texture, and resin density. Documented auction prices and specialist dealer records place authenticated Khai Nam at approximately $100,000 to $300,000 per kilogram, 3 to 4 times gold's price at current market levels. Vietnamese court records of the Nguyen dynasty document Khai Nam as a tribute material and gift of state significance, distinct in designation from ordinary agar wood. Its fragrance is described in Vietnamese, Japanese, and Arabic sources as cool, sweet, and more complex than standard OUD, with smoke that disperses slowly and laterally rather than rising normally. Wild Aquilaria crasna trees of the age and infection history required to produce authentic Khai Nam are now extremely rare in Vietnam. Vietnamese forestry enforcement records document seizures of material claimed to be Khai Nam, the majority of which laboratory analysis has found to be high-grade ordinary agar wood mislabeled. There are limits to authentication. No internationally standardized chemical profile for Khai Nam has been formally adopted, and the designation remains partly a matter of organoleptic assessment by trained specialists that laboratory instruments cannot fully replicate. A material described in Vietnamese imperial records, Arabic fragrance literature, and Japanese incense ceremony texts as distinct from all other aromatic wood. $300,000 a kilogram for authenticated specimens. The authentication is the harder problem. Number 2. Tran Hoang. Highest authenticated grade. Aquilaria crasna. Vietnam. Tran Hoang designates the rarest and most ancient wild agar wood from Aquilaria crasna, material from trees that accumulated resin over centuries and survived long enough in undisturbed forest to produce the density and fragrance complexity the highest grade classification requires. Documented auction prices for authenticated Tran Hoang reach approximately $200,000 to $500,000 per kilogram, 5 to 6 times gold's current price per weight. The distinction between Khai Nam and Tran Hoang is not universally consistent across national terminology systems. Japanese incense classification uses the Rikoku Gomi no Kiri system, developed by Edo period incense masters, which categorizes agar wood by geographic origin and fragrance profile into 6 producing regions and 5 fragrance qualities. The highest grade equivalent designated Kiara. The supply of material qualifying for the Tran Hoang designation is documented by Vietnamese forestry officials as negligible. Material entering trade under this designation is evaluated by a small number of recognized specialists through direct dealer relationships and occasional specialist auction rather than open market channels. There are limits to outside verification. The certification infrastructure for the highest agar wood grades is not internationally standardized, and the premium depends on expertise not transparent to buyers outside the specialist community. The oldest wild trees, accumulated over centuries, now gone from the forest. The material they produced is in collections and vaults. The price reflects both what it is and the certainty that nothing new of this grade will be produced in any time frame that matters. Number 1. Kiara. The apex classification. Japan. Aquilaria species. Kiara is the Japanese term for the absolute apex of agarwood quality as defined by the Rikoku Gomi no Kiri classification system developed by Edo period incense masters. The designation identifies material characterized by a fragrance quality described in the classical literature as bitter, cool, and of the highest refinement, combined with deep, even resin saturation, and a surface that takes a high polish without additional treatment. Authenticated Chiara at major auction has sold at per kilogram equivalent prices between $100,000 and $500,000, with individual documented sales at Christie's and specialist Japanese auction houses. At $500,000 per kilogram, Chiara trades at 6 times gold's current price per weight. The Shosoin Repository in Nara, the treasure house of Emperor Shomu, sealed in 756 CE and maintained with documented chain of custody since, includes pieces authenticated as Chiara, making it among the oldest continuously custodied specimens of any aromatic material in the world. Contemporary supply of material that authenticates as Chiara is documented as effectively zero from wild sources. The producing trees in Vietnam and Laos have been harvested to the point where specimens of sufficient age and resin complexity are no longer available at any commercially meaningful scale. Plantation agar wood has not produced authenticated Chiara by the organoleptic and physical standards of the specialist community. There are limits that define this entry. The price documented at auction reflects authenticated historical material, wood already in existence, in collections or vaults, changing hands through a market so specialist that most participants in the global timber trade have never encountered it. There is no production. There is only circulation of what already exists. The Rikoku Gomi system has 5 fragrance qualities. Chiara is one. In 1,300 years of Japanese incense culture, the practitioners who could reliably identify it have always been few. The material that meets the standard has always been rare. It is now, for practical purposes, unreproducible. A price that exceeds gold by a factor of 6, for a biological material from a tree, for a fragrance that disappears when it is burned.